morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are on our beautiful globe. Um, this is Spiral Dynamics Integral Live, our regular Saturday discussion group. Today, we're going to try to dive into the issue of um, healthy green. What is it? What is green? What could it be? Um, so that's what that's where we're gonna start. I did prepare a really short, very short emphasis on short presentation to kind of kick the process off. My intention was not to try to focus it too much, but just to throw out a real basic understanding, or at least what from the spiral dynamics theory standpoint, what green is, or is as what Claire Graves and Don Beck and Chris Cohen said, and then speculate a little bit on where green is at right now, and then we'll have a final question to kind of launch us into the discussion. Roots and branches of a healthy green. So what exactly is a green worldview? This is coming directly from the mouth of Don Beck and Chris Cohen. And I just pulled some stuff out of the book. First of all, it's very communitarian. Green, if the thinking is relativistic, the structures are egalitarian, and the process is consensual. And green really first appeared in human society in the mid-19th century and really gained strength about a century later. The basic theme of green is to seek peace within the inner self and explore with others the caring dimensions of community. So what are the characteristics and beliefs and actions of green? Again, this is according to Beck and Cohen. The human spirit must be freed from greed, dogma, and divisiveness. Feelings, sensitivity, and caring supersede cold rationality. Reach decisions through reconciliation and consensus processes. Refresh spirituality, bring harmony, and enrich human development. Explore the inner beings of self and others, and spread the earth's resources and opportunities equally among all. Well, to me, that does seem pretty healthy. So why are we needing to ponder the roots and branches of a healthy green? And I'm just gonna posit this. This is not coming out of anything that is written by Beck and Cohen about spiral dynamics, but there's a possible postmodern element affecting the mean green meme. Again, because postmodernism as a philosophy first appeared in the West somewhere in the 1950s, so mid 20th century. And just a few of the postmodern ideas, the summary is critical questioning of all knowledge and science, suspicion toward all grand narratives about progress, emphasis on symbols and contexts, ironic distance. Cultures have been oppressed and ruined by modern society, reveals injustice in democratic societies, and the relations create the individual, a multicultural order where the weak are included, and humanity has destroyed the biosphere. Those are some of the main elements of the postmodern philosophy, or the postmodern ideas. So maybe it's not so much mean green, but definitely edgy. And I guess what I'm positing is that maybe the green meme is so mean right now because it needs to be. Maybe the accumulation of problems created by 5,000 years of blue and orange V-beam dominance needed more than a kumbaya green to get the world started onto a healthier path. Maybe a way to look at green is to view the spiral dynamics image as the V-beam's healthy roots and the current postmodern manifestations of green as some early mean branches. Possibly a current goal of the green V-beam is to develop a tough love approach that balances its healthy roots with its currently unhealthy mean branches so that eventually healthy leaves might manifest in the future. And maybe green needs to move beyond its current state, become less mean, and grow into a state that is still a bit edgy, but also healthy. So the question then is, what would a healthy and still a little edgy green actually act like? Emphasis on the act. Not so much think or espouse, but act. What does green actually need to act like in order to be healthy, but not necessarily lose its current edgy state? So I'll open the floor up to discussion.
I'll start off because I'm about to eat. But
Hi, Daryl.
hi Daryl, hey Eloy. Yeah, so I think healthy manifestations of healthy green might look like volunteering. And yeah, so like, because I think a lot of the stuff is there's a lot of feeling with green and a lot of vibing and a lot of, you know, sometimes it's about kind of, you know, you care about stuff, right? But you care as you kind of look at the puppy in the commercial, and like that's a green feeling. You're like, oh, but then I think what I'd like to think of a healthy green would be is, well, then maybe you do go down to the animal shelter and you volunteer. And so that I think is the healthy version of green. And I think I'm trying to model the not focusing on the unhealthy green. But I think a lot of the times it's not towards those sorts of actions. And, you know, and of course, green is not going to solve like if the problem is around puppies, right? Green is not good at that, but it should at least, I think, be acting and trying to do something with the puppies. It might take yellow to figure out what to do with the puppies, which is not a very good example, but anyway, that's my take.
Just to get everybody up to speed on, we kind of have a protocol of if you want to speak, hit the little raise hand button, and that kind of keeps track of keeps order of who's going to need to speak next. And also, if you kind of have a comment in the middle, we've kind of chosen this little coffee cup as a way to kind of very quickly insert a thought before the next person speaks. So go ahead, Elliot.
Sure. I gonna go very blue and be like, man, I wish there were a list of the green pathologies, like the ways in which you can screw up green. Like I could name like terribly too heroic, like idealist dreamer green. And then we've got the like tolerant of everything except intolerance green. And you know, that's another green that is clearly get some people's nerves. But maybe kind of like having a list of these pathologies would help us sort of recognize green as extreme and like step back into something that might be more measured. On the, to throw another model in the mix, because I'm into models. If you look at, what am I looking at? The Sephirot from Kabbalah. There's two in the middle, which kind of fall on the left and right. Are on one side is kindness, and on the other side is sort of like judgment, sometimes translated as judgment. Other, maybe more like discernment. And of course, too much kindness, which kind of like it's green. Green has this feature of sometimes having too much kindness, is considered out of balance, and there's a necessity to balance the other way towards the discernment factor or the judgment-y factor that is can know when you're killing someone with kindness, sort of thing. So thinking about that, the too far along the green may not have enough discernment. As a just playing with models. I'm going to throw it at Justin.
I think complementing what Josh and Elliot have said as well. I think that one of the questions that I have is this idea of like, is any color necessarily healthy, but rather contextually, environmentally stimulated? That is a natural response to things, and so the movement and the identity that moves around is more healthy. And the more that we do that, we achieve our yellow, that integrated color. And so I don't want to take it to yellow, but rather stay with green and talk about it as, it is a healthy part of acknowledging feelings and seeing the oneness in everything. And when it tends to be edgy, it's because people aren't seeing this oneness, and there's an over identification, let's say, within the individual of saying like, but I see it in everyone. Why aren't you seeing it in everyone? Oh, you don't care about everyone, or something like that. There's this, like I said, an over identification that can create us versus them dynamic that happens with everyone. It happens within all of us. It's natural. It's human for us to create an us versus them as a reaction. And so I think that that's how green becomes edgy, is they, at any level, we create an us versus them. And perhaps that's, let's say, the red dipping into the green, or sliding around in terms of like, how do we defend ourselves, perhaps, from what we perceive to be threats. And so, I asked the question of like, is there actually a healthy green? Are all colors healthy in their expression of themselves and how they move around? But for the future of society, let's just say that, what are the consequences of too much, not enough? So, for example, too much green, we start to see, different effects. Too much orange, we start to see science overwriting, like, let's say, ethics. So one good positive thing to talk about is like World War II, the experimental science that happened on humans, which was very unethical. And then the response of, let's say, the green to come into that, to say, we need to, any type of research that needs to be done has to be approved ethically first. And so very positive consequences of moving towards green as well. So I think that there's something to be said about the integration of them, and the question itself being framed of like, what can a healthy green look like versus, because that creates that idea of like, others are not healthy. And I think that the way that we integrate them, the consequences, we can label them a lot. So I have a lot of questions. I'd like to hear a lot of people's thoughts on this anyway. So that's all I've got to say for now.
Barbara, go ahead.
Thinking about healthy versus unhealthy, Graves and Beck both thought that one of the things, and it's very human, that folks at a being that's not working to deal with life conditions do is they double down and then they triple down on their current behavior, and it gets more and more bizarre, more and more non-responsive to an environment that's too complex. the saying is, orange solved a bunch of problems of material in the material world, and then kept doubling down on that and created problems that was beyond the capacity of orange to solve, right? And now green, with change coming so rapidly, green hasn't had a lot of time to solve problems, right? And orange kind of came out of the box, solving problems and creating them on the side as fast as its little feet could carry them. But orange demonstrably solved a lot of problems as it went on. Most of us probably are medically alive now because of orange, for example. Probably half, 2/3 of us here would not be alive if it weren't for orange. And now we've become fat couch potato slobs, and we're making ourselves sick because orange really didn't solve the underlying problems. And so green now, it's certainly done a bang up job, and I think Josh, you say this a lot too, of identifying the problems, of pointing out where orange has failed and failed miserably, and has been doing that since at least my time in the late 60s. But healthy solutions, good solutions that were scalable have been few and far between. And I think it's partly because the other V-memes are still so powerful, and especially worldwide, right? We just have huge leftover blobs of purple red out in the third world, and now in inner cities in the US at least, that can't be dealt with. And so the problems keep compounding at each V-meme, and green is just not able to scramble fast enough to provide more than small limited solutions. And then it gets beyond itself, right? And so wind and solar, for example, perfect example of a really good idea that won't scale, can't scale, and green is just going to do everything it can to divert attention away from better solutions, including stopping being so wasteful. So it's done a small incremental change, and then it doesn't scale. And green, because it's more global, thinks it should scale, right? And orange is pretty good at scaling. I mean, look at what corporations have done worldwide. Green seems to be much poorer at scaling. Blue scaled very well, right? Look at the Crusades, look at religious movements. So I'm wondering, why isn't green scalable? Is it just that the rapid change, the rapid deterioration of life conditions has gotten to the point that orange just hasn't had, or orange has done so much damage, green hasn't had time to keep up with it? I don't know, but that's a real question that comes to my mind. And I think Justin and then Paul both have comments.
Yeah, I was gonna comment on the string that you just started. It seems to me that part of the problem with green is that, I mean, green is really all about the subjective. I mean, it's not, I mean, I don't want to say it's not about the objective world, but it's definitely about the subjective world. It's a left 2-quadrant realm. And orange has been so successful in quote unquote solving world problems because they've addressed the objective side. And there's there are, on the objective side, there are good ways and bad ways of doing things. You know, and you can, but when you get on the subjective side, because it is subjective, I mean, there are 8 billion subjective truths on the planet. And how do you corral that? And maybe that's part of the problem. Elliot, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and invite some of my orange and say the controversial thing that popped into my head of what do you mean by healthy? Or kind of like healthy by whose standard? Like if you ask green, what does healthy green look like? You get a very different answer than if you ask orange or if you ask blue, where green might be like, well, we need to listen to everyone. We need to do the best thing for everyone. Orange might be like, well, how do we make money off of that? Unless it's making money, it's not healthy for me. And, you know, blue might be like, well, it's got to be organized. It's got to be lawful. It's got to be rightful. Red might be like, well, we have to just do it in a better way than other people. And purple might be like, well, we need to tell the best stories about it. Like, what do you mean by healthy? There's a lot goes into the assumption of the word healthy. And that, like, even trying to hold all that in my head is kind of a struggle.
That's a very green inquiry, right?
Well, to ask in that way and check, like, what would all the other levels think of me? Yeah, that's got a green flavor in it as well. But like, what's healthy anyway? I'm gonna flick to Justin
Daryl.
and then Daryl.
Daryl, if you want to.
No,
I
sure.
think Justin.
Justin had a quick
Quick
comment.
one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see that. Sorry, Justin.
No problem. I'm happy to wait. So two things very quickly, Barbara. I'd love to hear on, you were talking about small communities of red and purple, and also you were talking about like global, like let's say third world. I was very curious as to what exactly you were pointing at. Personally, like I'm from South Africa. I've lived in London for about 13 to 15 years. I've lived in Thailand. I've lived in Indonesia for a year at a piece. I lived in Argentina for a year as well. You know, so like I've traveled around, and although the government structures could be easily labeled, the communities that are within are usually very different, and it depends on where you go. So I'm very curious to hear you talk more about like the purple and red that you see, like just in the US, and what you're kind of looking at when you say that. You know, what kind of things give you the indications of that? Just for my own curiosity. And then I think the second thing that I wanted to talk about, or rather put to you, is the idea that wind and solar aren't, you know, scalable. I think someone mentioned it in the chats as well, as in, you know, there are alternative forms of energy. And again, this is my own curiosity of like, why not? Just based on your thoughts, not necessarily what other people are saying. I agree. I also think they're not necessarily scalable. I don't think that they're great options, but there are like very interesting battery designs that are actually coming out in like 2024, things called iron flow batteries, which are very interesting. I think there's a lot of potential there, and integrating them into current systems would really help out a lot of different things. But I'm just curious, again, going back to you and your comments, you know, what are you paying attention to? I'd like to ask just a little bit of talk about that, if that's all right.
I guess I go back to basic Graves' neurological capacity. And so in the inner cities, but also interestingly enough, I'm in a abandoned rural area where to my surprise, a lot of people here look exactly like the inner city folks I knew in Houston, you know, and their capacity to solve the problems of their own life conditions is almost nil. It is amazing how you know, all of us are educated, competent people. We've gotten to at least orange, and so we at least have some capacity to deal with what's going on around us. And so you walk in these communities, and as I said, I taught at a trade school for disadvantaged folks in Houston, and I really began to understand the problem-solving limitations of purple orange. And you know, I'll give you a perfect real-world example. So we had a break during the middle of the long classes, right? And we were in the middle of something, so I said, we'll take a break after we finish that. One of my students raised his hand and said, but Ms. Brown, I paid for my break. And you could see in the room the students that were already at blue, and we had some orange as well, who looked at each other and went, say what? And I finally said, gee, you could have sat at home on break for free. So I don't think you're paying for your break here. And about 2/3 of the students went, yeah, but my folks that I read as still stuck in purple red, oh no, we paid for a break. You know, I mean, it's those sorts of things that even when you pointed out the obvious, right? That you learn that there are conversations that can't be followed. And I find that around here, there's a lot of blue. There are just ideological conversations that you can't have. So that's kind of where I'm going. It's the neural capacity isn't there yet. And I use that yet because I don't think that it's not developable. It's just that nobody's helping them develop it. And then you asked real quick on wind and solar. I actually have solar and on the grid solar because in this climate, I would have to have a whole basement full of batteries to be able to be sure I won't freeze to death at 20 below. And so it and the intermittent part about it. I mean, we've had these Canadian forest fires, right, with high haze, and all of a sudden I'm only getting 2/3 of the output that I normally get. I mean, I'm looking at going, what the heck happened? Oh, duh. So it's the practical limitations yet. And meanwhile, you know, we're putting all our eggs in those baskets, at least they are around here. And I worry about just that practicality, right? It's in all the eggs in a basket that I think mostly that, and also just resources. I don't know if everybody's seen the calculations of how much copper wire one would need to do wind and solar. It is undoable, period. It can't happen. So that's the sort of thoughts on that. Thanks for asking.
Carol, go ahead.
So I guess I have a different take on it. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
So, you know, I see first off, the emergence of green, while what I've listened to is that there's an argument that we kicked around the last 20 minutes that green has not gotten as robust as it should. And one has to think, well, where are we? Let's just say in the United States or some of the quote unquote first world. Let's just, you know, Europe, Australia, Japan, you know, people who are very advanced. I would say as the technicalization and depersonalization manifested in the nodal functions of orange, let's say, orange was at its precipice. I mean, it was there, it's solidly there. And because that robustness at that nodal level begins to let folks introspectively go, is this it? Okay, I'm rich, I got all of this, I got that, but I've lost my kids, I've lost this, I've lost that. So the loneliness that is the result of nodal orange is what gives rise to the ascendance of green. So yeah, green may not be as robust, but here are indicators along the way of what's happening at the transitions or transaction, those transition phases where the orange is waning and the green is emerging, is in that flux of ebb and flow where the solutions to the manifested problems really show up. For instance, social networking, one could argue, be it technologically supported by what we're doing with Zoom right now, and hold on one second. So basically, I lost my train of thought. So what I hear another conversation in the back, so I kind of got distracted. The flow I was on was basically say the ebb and flow of green and orange, really sort of with the social networks, you have a combination of the orange technology basically put upon by the social networking that really technically, in my opinion, is a green manifestation. The networking, be it supported by Zoom or just in what people are doing to connect to each other, I think we're in the age of network. And I think where we have come to the end of the Enlightenment age, in my opinion, is given rise to the age of network, be it social network technologically, or be it network, just people wanting to gather and get together. And then on the tails of the pandemic coming about, people longed to get together. They wanted to be together. And the pathology that began to emerge was the more akin to the pathology that's orange, which is loneliness. The motivation for green showing up is that orange has taken a person to the depersonalization state, so much so that they long for connection. And was further exacerbated by the results of the pandemic. So I would say green is emerging. It may not be as robust, but I disagree with the notion that the green technologies won't stack up. What we have in that instance is what Christensen would call the innovator's dilemma. All the innovations, for whatever category you look at, all innovations will take a moment before it hits S curves and takes off. But what has to happen? Certain policies have to be in place. For instance, the way we subsidize oil companies is a function of the fact that that fundamental need for our energy is what it is, period. Now, if some of those subsidies could be, channeled into different alternative sources, you might see a different robustness show up. But I completely, hands down, just disagree with the fact that all of these green technologies will never stack up. This sounds a whole lot like when the man wanted to shut the patent office down in the United States at the turn of the last century, from the 1800s to the 1900s. They said, hey, everything that could be invented has already been invented. And then the phonographs came about, telephone came about, everything came about way after a period of time when the person who was headed up the patent office said, we've pretty much invented all we can invent. I think innovator's dilemma would argue that you've not yet necessarily hit the S curve to take off. And part of the problem is the way societies have been structured and designed. And that has been designed to keep in place the incumbent technologies, the incumbent companies and the way they do things until something so transformative comes about, which is kind of like AI showing up and things where people have to fundamentally rethink things. I think that those are my thoughts. Green has yet to hit its node. It's still on the ascendance. There are places, but where green is mature, I'll say this last thing, where green is mature, oftentimes Don Beck would articulate is in the Scandinavian countries. How well are they run? They have a big influx of green values manifested in their social policies and so on and so forth. That's just my hit.
Question, Daryl. So you take social media as a positive thing. I think it's probably the most destructive thing in our society right now. So this neural marketing stuff and the AI that is doing everything to capture people's minds and to prevent deep thought on anything. Where do you put that? Is it a last death throes of orange, or do you have a different take on that?
No, that's a good question. I think you put social media aside for 1 second and just look at traditional media, legacy media. Legacy media pumps out a lot of misinformation on its own by itself,
Amen.
right?
Amen.
So it's kind of like when the Bible, and I say this often, when the people misinterpret the Bible and they'll say, well, the money is the root of all evil. No, what the Bible actually says is the love of money. That's the root of all evil. Money is, money is just sitting there. You could do good with money or you could do bad with money. And it's really about the person, their life, and what it is that motivates them. So I see technology much like that. So I kind of fancy myself as a technology advocate, if you will. I fancy myself a bit of a futurist, although these days I don't keep up as much as I used to. Nevertheless, I come down on the side of positivity. So to your question, I would say like this: yes, absolutely. The ills and evils, however you want to put it, of what's been manifested in social media has been debilitating for sure. But look at the policies in China, which is a whole nother problem. But I want to point out one thing on how they manage their social media. In China, from what I understand, the TikTok, for instance, it's not allowed to do what it does in the United States. We have this quote unquote open society, and that gives rise to everything. I know someone from Germany, and they said, there is no such thing as free speech in Germany. You can't go out on the streets and yell Heil Hitler without the police coming to take your ass away. So there's this notion of free speech becomes a challenge, just what is the balance of that? So whether it's a technology-driven solution or problem, it has a whole lot to do with, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, it has a whole lot to do with the manifested values and behaviors associated with how folks are valuing this, that, or the other thing. In Germany, as a result of their history and what happened in World War II, they absolutely positively do not allow for you to go on the streets and yell this, that, and the other thing and cause a ruckus. In the United States, we're still able to do that. Now, is that good or bad? I don't know. But I think the technology is like money. It doesn't matter. It's what the people who have motivations and interests that are different from the healthy, when I say healthy, I mean, when my definition of healthy values or healthy societies or healthy organizations is it benefiting the majority of the people? Does 95% of the people go, oh, man, that is a good thing? That's, to me, is the definition of a healthy manifestation of values. Is that
Amen.
Yeah.
Even if 51% would say that's a good thing, Daryl, I think we'd be better off.
Better off, yeah.
And maybe therein lies the problem of healthy. I like that definition really well, because I think too, both Graves and Keegan talked about the goal of each meme and each increase in stage, right, is to allow people to better cope with their life conditions.
Right.
And it's very clear that we're not coping well with our life conditions. And so as more and more people seem to articulate that they personally are not coping with life conditions, that I would then say we're in some sort of a unhealthy manifestation of whatever meme that they happen to be embedded in. And one issue maybe we need to think about some is we now have 6 active V-memes competing for attention in the Western world. And I don't think yellow and turquoise are making a dent. I know they do in our groups, but in the real world, So that
Thanks for coming.
multiple voices is something maybe we need to think about. Green isn't doing a good job of juggling those. And so a manifestation of healthy green might be not, we talked, somebody said, I let everybody have their own thoughts, except if they disagree with me, or I have everybody can have their own thoughts, except if they're bigots, right? I mean, it's like, well, no, that's the healthy green would be, I need to understand what life conditions they're in and what capacities they have that is producing those unhealthy manifestations. And I would see that as a really healthy green. Things like some of the communications techniques that go into active listening, nonviolent communications, and bunches of other techniques that Green has come up with to do deep listening seems to be a really good positive manifestation.
Sabi?
Yeah. I hold myself patiently for the last three addings on the topic. I think that's a healthy green value. I mean, patience. Anyway, in my understanding of green is I could sum up with some thoughts of a Hungarian psychologist called Peter Popper, who said once that I think yes, in the early 2000s, that let me recall what he said. Yeah, I haven't seen so much topics and thoughts about self-knowledge and self-development and love and care. And he also adds that it's because usually society and people talk about things a lot and put high emphasis on things which are lacking. So for me, he I mean, he didn't know spirodynamics, or anyway, he is a clinical expert and a psychologist. But I think this sentence of his, because this here is how he continues. So I haven't seen so much love and self-development and striving for self-development and self-knowledge, and in the shadow or hiddenly or yes, in the back of the stage, a lot of hatred and jealousy. So the shadows, and I don't know whether you understand me, but that's
Yeah.
my points on green. And also what Daryl said, I agree on that social networking and our gathering now here is also I think healthy manifestation and good point of green, a healthy green. So that's my thinking.
I think it's really often really hard to not separate or to keep separate the technology and what it does or what it's capable of doing. In other words, the objective technology, and then how it's used. In other words, in a sense, the subjective side of it. And I think that's where, to me, that's where I reconcile what Daryl's saying and what Barbara was asking, is that yes, the objective technology of social media is creating unheard of and unprecedented capability of connecting with other people. Unfortunately, that's the good story. Unfortunately, it's to a large extent it's being used by people not in a good way. Thank
So
you, Sam.
remember, that's the case, whether it's social media or traditional legacy media, is still the case. But just to pick up a little bit on what was said by Zabi, if I'm saying your name right, his point is solid. And the green the health, let's say, the positive, if not healthy, green really comes down to the idealistic social connection, love, and all that's associated with those harmonies. Now, that could simply be an aspiration, but at the end of the day, we're nowhere near nodal green, where green comes into a full manifested expression of positivity. Now, any of the V memes, like Barbara said, could go sideways and become malignant. All of them have that tendency, if not for the sake of good policies and behaviors and so on and so forth. But yeah, the big calling call of green is it addresses the loneliness that manifested out of the orange in its fullness, and it's just beginning. So I'll just leave it at that. Love is a key thing. I heard a lecture once by a business expert who basically wrapped up his business lecture pointing out that love, at the end of the day, love is a much more powerful motivation to get things done. And I thought that was a fascinating business talk.
Josh, go ahead.
Yeah, and so if folks want to get in the queue, raise your hand down there in the reactions, and you can also, if you want to make a comment based on what somebody else had just said, a few people did that in the chat. You do that coffee cup thing, even though it says I'm away, it's just the one emblem that stays up, and that means you want to make a comment on what somebody said. Yeah, so I guess I just want to comment on a lot of good stuff is being said, but how to really identify what, healthy green would be. It's a loaded term, healthy. I don't even know if Beck and Cohen were using that term. I was pretty sure they were using open, closed, and arrested, which those seem even different than healthy, right? Like open is, I'm open to changing into the next thing, but you can probably be a very healthy green and not be open to moving to your next stage. So I think that's, I don't really know. But anyway, I think these days, a lot of what we might label to be green has certainly green elements, but it's really hard. Like for instance, all right, so I'm a Jew, right? And so if I say, let's protect all the Jews, care about the Jews, that sounds pretty green. That could certainly be green. What else it could be? It could be orange, because I'm like, hey, help the Jews so I can enhance my status or business, whatever. Blue, help the Jews, because that's my group I belong to. Or it could be red, help the Jews, help me, right? So that's why I think a lot of the social justice stuff, I think, originated actually in orange, and I think some of it is green, but a lot of it ain't green, or ain't healthy green. So it's suspicious. It's hard to tell with the social stuff, because if your cause is just like advocating for you, it's like maybe it's green, maybe it's not. But environmental stuff, so that's kind of been the field I've been focusing on more over the years. And I mean, I always have, but I'm stepping more away from the social stuff, because I'm not convinced that people really want to help anything. But with environmental stuff, so if you like look at a forest that was there and then you see it getting cut down, whatever you feel about that, I think that comes from a pretty pure green, because it's not necessarily about you. And of course you can, as an activist or whatever, you can take it into all the other V memes. But that's why I notice a lot of my friends who are the environmentalists and maybe not as keen all the time on the social justice stuff, I feel like they're really a lot of times coming from that green source, because again, it's something outside of yourself. It's outside of humanity. Ultimately, it is for the protection of humanity, of course. But yeah, my only point is that I think if we want to home in on what a healthy green is, again, doesn't mean it's effective. It doesn't mean it's not naive, but a healthy green is often components of environmental concern. That's all I got for that.
Barbara, you've got your coffee cup.
Yeah, a real quick thought on Graves and Beck on healthy and unhealthy. Not Cohen, only Graves and Beck. And that is that one of the jobs, I guess, of the V-mean that you're currently sort of modal in is to cope with your life conditions, right? You know, my life conditions, not Daryl's life conditions, for example. And so they both would say, you know, if you're living in a micro environment that supports red, then and it copes well with your environment, then they would call that healthy, right? But great, and Graves, you know, said, I think this is a really very great green statement. People have a right to be where they are. You know, the sort of Wilbur idea that we're going to enlighten every person everywhere it is a bit not only unrealistic, but perhaps arrogant. But then Graves also said, and they don't have a right to act out. And so if you're in a situation where your current capacity is clearly not allowing you to cope with life conditions, and you see a lot of acting out, and I think Daryl, you mentioned some of this acting out, particularly in the US, as opposed to the Nordic countries, for example. So one would, from Graves' original thoughts, the Nordic countries would be in a relatively healthy green state. And in the US, most of the V-means are now acting out. And that becomes a problem. So when you're from your current level of consciousness, whatever it is, you're unable to cope with your personal current life conditions, either as an individual or as a group that you identify with, and you begin acting out rather than, and maybe that would be getting stuck in the gamma trap and doing more and more of what is obvious to everybody else around you not working, but you just can't see it, so you're doubling down and tripling down on counterproductive behaviors, then that's where all V-means show up as unhealthy, if that makes sense.
I kind of want to ask this question. I have in my head that if you put a person under pressure, they tend to drop down to their lowest healthy level-ish, you know, as in you take a happy green person and you hit them with some authority and they'll drop back to like a red angry protester or something, maybe, where they'll, you know, that sort of thing happens. And I don't mean to become green, it's just that people put under pressure tend to drop back and people with space tend to be lifted up. And my question is kind of like, well, I sort of find myself in a position where I'm a bit under pressure. Like, how should I work to counterbalance that? Do I just have to run away from the situation, or is there strategies or pathways to working with the recognition that, oh no, I'm actually like, I'm falling back, or I'm not healthy. It's hard for me to be a full self. It's hard for me to express the complexity of the higher levels at the moment, and I'm feeling like I'm falling back. What do I do?
There's two types of fallback, though. I can remember talking with Don about appropriate fallback. So, you know, you're the victim of a mugging. And I had a turquoise friend who actually just talked the guy down. Now, not being turquoise, I would not be so foolish as to even think about attempting that. But I might well go to my red and and go into a self-defense mode. So Don would have called that appropriate feedback, right? Appropriate fallback. But then there's inappropriate fallback. I remember this, a college friend who would have been maybe mid-20s, goes back to the family reunion over summer and said he's in this horrible position of at 23, 24, does he sit still at the children's table? And there's that, you just get sucked back into the blue structure where you're at and aren't able to have the orange and green solutions that if you're in a slightly less constrained environment seem to come up, right? So I think that's where I know several researchers in fallback, and that they really talk about the difference there. Is it appropriate? Or are you just having flashbacks to things you couldn't cope with? And maybe your point about was that stage that I fell back to ever totally healthy, right? We say we transcend and include, but sometimes it wasn't 100% healthy, and we forgotten to include some things that probably were important when we were there that had been particularly problematic with us as we left. And so suddenly we're back to dealing with the things that we didn't deal with well under a fallback condition. So it's a very complicated, but I think really important. And one of the things I've noticed is that once you've hit green, say, all of when you fall back to a different stage, it doesn't look the same as it does when you're coming up from the bottom. In other words, you have to be pretty traumatized not to be able to see it differently, right? I mean, you really have to get sucked into something awful before you don't treat it differently than you would have 20 years ago when you were at that stage.
Sabi?
Yes, Barbara, maybe this is not the place for marketing, but I recommend all of you who haven't seen this YouTube channel's video, Can We See Our Life Conditions? It was a presentation by Barbara, and I think that's pretty well answers many of the questions maybe what have arisen up until now. And also I wanted to ask from Barbara that when you say appropriate and inappropriate fallbacks, for example, if someone, okay, let's just be as practical as it can be. If someone shoots at you, you shoot back. So you pick the I don't know. I mean, that's red in my understanding. So how you when you in an appropriate fallback, you go back to the stage which is appropriate for the proper answer, or how? Because in one of Dombeck's interviews with an integral guy, he said that blue, for example, or the next stage always arises when it can address the problems and the issues of the previous and unhealthiness of the previous system. So that maybe you get what I'm asking. If not, ask me to clarify.
No, I think I do get what you're asking. So I think red is a particularly bad example, maybe. And I'll have to say, I am known for my ability to walk through blue organizations without creating waves, even though I totally disagree with a lot of the blue structures. But I'm unlike most people my age. Most baby boomers went through traumatic blue. for some reason. It was something that my generation just never dealt with very well. And for me, I was lucky. I was in a relatively welcoming rural community that did blue in a non-toxic sense mostly. And so I don't have any problem getting into sync with blue. So I may not agree with them. In fact, 99% of the time these days, I probably don't. But I understand where they're coming from, and the energy doesn't bother me. So one of the things that I notice is that a lot of my orange and green friends just can't tolerate a blue energy. When we get into a work team that's just all blue, I'm sorry, I agree with Sheldrake on that. There's some sort of an energy that comes from those groups that can be very uncomfortable for folks that didn't deal with that well. And red energy for a lot of folks these days is very hard to deal with. So being able to work with people where they are, right? I mean, that's sort of what Beck called spiral wizards. I would call that appropriate fallback as well. Not just a bad situation, but a normal world situation, right? Where the group is demonstrably not second tier and has very little green capacity in it, to be able to walk in that comfortably without treating all of the folks there like deplorables. It is just super, super important.
Thank you. I also want to add one more thing that I don't know if I'm right, but in my understanding, green is like the stage, if we think it as a stage, which brings the full spectrum of humanness to the spiral. Before that, it's not acceptable, even achievable, or creatable, and it accepts all the other systems in the first tier, except yellow and turquoise. So he accepts all but yellow and turquoise, and they cannot see.
Oh yeah, no, my hit on the coping mechanisms when a situation arises in the person, to the question of where do you go when you're under pressure. I'm reminded, Josh pointed this out, and he's correct. We would be well advised, when I can't remember who it was. I think it was Elliot who said he struggled with, well, what definition are we working with when we talk about healthy? I think Josh provided a reminder to us in terms of the theory itself. Open, arrested, and closed is a better nomenclature to discuss the viability, let's say, of V-mean interactions and such. So my hit is this. Remember, and Barbara touched upon this a little bit too, we are not, V-means are not people. I'm not blue, I'm not red, right? Neither is anyone else. But they are ways of thinking and being that kind of come through us, so to speak. And so at that point, I'm reminded, Don would often say, we're a mixture, an admixture of value systems, and the capability, once realized, as your living conditions become more complex and you go up the spiral, which a lot of people think, oh, that's my goal, I want to go up the spiral, but that's not necessarily a useful thought, nor is it reflective of reality. You could be very fully developed and self-actualized and never aspire to get out of a blue existence, like Billy Graham, the preacher, right? So who was fully actualized in blue and didn't necessarily aspire to this or the other. Now you could say he had a little bit of orange in him, but that's a function of the society, right? But Don would often say, and I'm indoctrinated with his way of thinking for the most part, that we are admixtures. And once you pass through a living condition, that capacity resides in you, and you can call upon it when necessary. And I'm always reminded, and I often speak to the fact, being from New Orleans, when Katrina hit, people had to devolve down to beige, because that's where the living conditions dictate they do. They didn't have time to aspire to this, that, or the other thing because the flood was there. They could not eat, they could not drink. Danger was all around them. And so, yeah, they may have been orange before Katrina. Post Katrina, for the next week or two, they had to go all the way to beige because the life conditions required them to do that. So when you're under pressure, the thought, if you want to step back, if you could do this and be clinical about it, when you're under pressure and you have a chance to self-reflect, I would say, Elliot, the thing is you've always had that capacity to devolve when you need to. You call upon that way of being or that way of dealing with something, and it's okay. But keeping in mind that open, arrested, and closed. If you're open, if your transitions from one value mean expression to the next was dense enough and open enough, you could call upon that at will, almost, I would say. But like Barbara pointed out, a really good point, I think. Your experience coming up the complexity of life conditions as you spiral up is not necessarily the same as if you have to devolve because you're under pressure, because that capacity, having reached green at some point in your life, you're at least aware and can call upon a greenness if your problem is such that, you know what, I need to take action. What is it about action? Red, the bad connotation people give to red, they always fail to remember of all the V memes, it is red that takes action. And sometimes when you're under pressure, it means I need to do something. I don't care what it is. Something needs to happen. And that's a very red expression. So the admixtures that are within us allow us to call upon any value to meet the moment of that life conditions hitting you in the face. That's just my hit on it.
I like what you're saying, Daryl, and you're making most of the points I was going to make. But I'll just throw the two layers in of lines of development and also transcend and include. So one of the things I notice is that if you're trying to fit an environment like Barbara's talking about, or if you're under pressure or you're surrounded by a red culture and you're green especially, it's not, I'm not sure fallback. I know it's a an accepted term, but I think another way to think about it is that you're not falling back to a stage, but you are revisiting your feelings in that stage, in that environment that calls it up from the perspective of green, which allows you to look at yourself as well as other people from a perspective of acceptance. I accept that I have red tendencies, and of course, family and other people who are intimate enough with us that can trigger us, bring out these things. And at some point in your development, maybe not green, you're maybe just accepting it. But I think by the time you're second tier, you look at those incidents and say, I have an opportunity to kind of go back and iron over that wrinkle a couple more times, put a little spray on it and get that wrinkle out. And then another wrinkle will appear. There will always be these tests of our, in different lines of development. I might be completely mentally, emotionally, spiritually at a high level. And then my sister could say something that makes me feel like I'm just worthless and question who I am. And, she knows me better than anybody. How can she not be right? I can spin with the best of them, but I recover quicker. And then I say, thank God I can still get tweaked now, because I'm from this perspective of looking to accept a wholer self of myself as well as the world, that environment thing that Josh is speaking about. I also have the inner environment, the upper left quadrant. And these tweaks that push us into communicating within or falling back into one of these, quote, lower stages is an opportunity at some point to say, I am that.
Thank you, Susan. Josh.
Yeah, well, first I wanted to see if anyone else wanted to chime in and raise their hand. Everyone is welcome to participate. Let's see here. I was hoping to challenge us to think about healthy green in terms of what would make somebody who, say, has a center of gravity in orange want to embody green characteristics, because what I'm seeing is there is a major barrier right now in terms of who wants to do that, because a lot of it maybe might be unhealthy, or other V memes masquerading as green, right? You know, when, and again, not to harp on the negative stuff, but when green is something like, you have to be the most tolerant person in the world or I will fucking kill you. It's like, even orange is like, doesn't sound very compassionate to me. So what would be some of the maybe fruits of wanting to belong to a green V meme that could, I don't want to say entice orange, because it's not about that if they're not ready for it, but I do think that there are people who are in orange. They do have egalitarian values. They maybe are ripe for green, but they're seeing so much unhealthy green that they don't, that they end up pushing back, right? A lot of folks who aren't a fan of what I call the fundamentalist identitarian stuff, very few of them are like, say, you know, I hate this type of people, right? They're usually indifferent or like, yeah, I'm tolerant of it. But then they're told, no, you have to love it and you have to be, you are that, you know, you, whatever. I don't want to get into specifics for various reasons. But anyway, so just off the top of my head, I'll answer my own question. And then I'm curious if anyone has any responses. But I think maybe there is a certain loneliness in orange with that individuality and the desire to kind of always outdo their competitor and to always grind. And there might be something appealing in just hanging out in a field, smoking weed with the other hippies playing hacky sack. You know what I mean? So like maybe a belonging and a potential of, hey, dude, you don't have to, it's not always a fight, you know, it's not always a game that you have to win. So yeah, curious if anyone else has any thoughts on that concept.
Well, Josh, I guess I would agree with what you and then Daryl did reflect that also. There's that, I mean, probably one of the core things is maybe I wouldn't use the word loneliness, but it would be appropriate, but just you lose the gusto for and I'll talk about orange transitioning to green, the gusto, the satisfaction that you get out of pursuing material wealth kind of goes away, or it lessens, which opens you up to other things. Now, in terms of where do you go to, where would a person like that go to look for it? I guess, I mean, I think there are lots of healthy green environments on the, in the world. I guess I would not go to the social media to find healthy green, because what you're going to find on the social media is everything. You're going to find, the worst of green and the best of green and everything in the middle. But I think there are communities of interest that definitely reflect strong, healthy, green, communal, positive lessons and teach them. Elliot.
Yeah, I have a few answers to this, but I'd point towards, what is at the peak of orange? Like, what happens once you have $100 million and then another $100 million? What was all of that for anyway? And people will point to all sorts of answers, but some of them are, well, then I can buy my family a house, and then I can like create a celebration, and then I can really show off to all the people around me. And suddenly all of those things are very green. They're like, they're collective focus. And, add another 100 million and another billion beyond that, and you get Charlie Munger saying things like, well, actually, it's my job to guard the retirement of millions of mom and pop Americans. Charlie Munger, obviously, running his big fund. He sees, one of the ways he describes his vision is it's all for the people. And that's one. So one transition out of orange is, once you're sufficiently at the top of that peak, you make your meaning out of the next one, or by appealing to the next one. And the other is, if you can't do it, if for whatever reason you're capped, like it's actually impossible to win in capitalism for you as a person who was not born in the right country with the right education. And so because you can't get meaning making here, you have to start getting meaning making somewhere else. And that's when, well, I didn't care about money anyway. I actually only cared about people and family and caring for people. And those are, you know, the healthy push, and the, I would call it slightly less healthy push to the next level is the peak and the cap of what happens at those levels. Hopefully a person doesn't fall down when you cap their potential at that level. But yeah, those are some answers.
I just popped in Graves' original diagrams about what the stages look like, and you notice they never go away. They're always there and accessible to us. I do want to bring out some unhealthy manifestations of orange and then green. Said's work is certainly something that you all should read before you think orange is orange in a peak. Positive manifestation is about money. It's not. It's about power over nature. It's about my personal ability to make an impact on the world around me. And money's a scorecard, but when only money matters, which is what's happened in the last 20, 25 years, then that becomes totally negative. And in fact, some of the positive things that orange used to do can't be done because you can't do things in the physical world. All your energy goes into virtual and money, which is not peak orange. So, and I think green maybe has the same sort of thing. We talked about postmodernism. I think, Paul, you did. It's distorted green, right? So an incorrect interpretation of relativity and of quantum uncertainty is that there is this postmodern idea that therefore there is no reality. Everything is just whatever you make it up to be, and that is not is not going to work well for what green needs to be in the world. You know, that means that you can't look at the consequences, right? If you truly believe, as postmodernists versus green, right? If you truly believe that there is nothing real, you just made it all up in your mind, then there is no better. There is no unhealthy, right? And therefore that makes it really hard for green to look at the consequences of their action, right? Because there are no consequences. If my actions have no consequences, it's all just made up. So I think, you know, those two things have kind of caused both orange and green to run amok a bit and not be what they could be.
You know, Barbara, I would agree with you. It's kind of why I put the little postmodern section in there. there's a lot about postmodern ideas that are good. I mean, it's good to recognize that there are groups of people on the world who have been downtrodden by the system. It's good to recognize that there are negative elements in democracies. But I think where postmodernism itself kind of went off the rails is when it pushed itself into that, absolutely 10,000% subjective nature of it, that there is the only reality is my perceptions. And to me, that's ultimately what did the biggest harm to the green V meme, because the green V meme is based, I mean, it's a we us V meme. It's about the collective. It's about working together. It's about, and if you take.
Well, and it's about conformity generation, Paul.
Right, I realize that. But what the ultimate, or at least the most recent manifestation of postmodernism, is this nihilistic, there is no objective, there is only subjective. Ultimately, what that does is it turns, what it did, I think, to green is it turned that we, us, green into an incredibly mean I, me green. I mean, if all the world is just about your subjective perception, then nothing else exists. There is no we, us. It's just me.
Well, and the conformity.
That's a malignancy, isn't it? I mean,
It is. It's very malignant.
Yeah, I just wanted to make one quick comment. Was said, I'm not sure, Barbara, who pointed it out. Yeah, I think it was you, Barbara, who pointed out Saeed's work. One of the things Saeed really pointed out was the reason the malignancy of orange began to emerge was because in the United States, anyway, maybe across the board of the Western world, they diminished the goodness that was blue. And blue became, all the rules and regulations and everything was minimized, which gave way to a malignancy in the orange meme. It did not rest upon a solid blue construct, if you will, and so it would go that way again. If that was an arrested blue and then it began to be diminished, that meant the orange was just being built on a house of cards, so to speak. And so it would be, I guess, with the orange to transition to green as well.
Elliot, you made a really interesting point post. I have an opinion that there needs to be another level between green and yellow that is postmodernism and deconstruction in the uncanny valley of the falling apart of meaning making. Could you please say more about that?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled on it by accident in the way that I felt like I traveled through V memes, and then I see it in a lot of other people that at the end of green, the end of stage one, people kind of turn around and go, wow, that's a lot of different meaning makings. And they get real confused for a while and they get lost. And then if they hang out too long there, they end up in nihilism and postmodernism. And hopefully they don't, and they end up in sort of emerging the other side in this yellow space that is sort of organizing the other forms of meaning making, which is a new level of systematizing. But I've just seen it, I saw it in myself, and I've seen it in a bunch of other people, that it really feels, at least to me, like there's a level there. There's a whole level. You can call it black or something because it's the gap. But it really feels like there's just a whole nother level there that obviously it's hard to talk about. And because it's a deconstruction space, the language around it is kind of confusing and very postmodern. But like if it were depicted as a whole level and it's the confusing one that is a little bit like the Dark Night of the Soul, I think that has the potential to really help people see themselves as occasionally people who are there to see themselves as being there, and then see themselves as needing to organize from there, or see themselves as needing to accept the dark a little bit. But this is just like a little bit of insight that's from my life and from people I've known.
That feels a lot more like exiting In other words, if you look at Graves' drawings, you'll see the V-beam goes down as the other one rises. And you're over, and I think what you're just describing is what happens when we get over the peak and we begin to experience all of the downsides. I'm trying to think what orange looks like. There's some
Lonely.
people in here who have done orange, blue. What? Yeah, because somebody just asked that. How do we get out of orange? So the equivalent to the postmodern deconstruction things that should be maybe exiting green, right? What is the orange equivalent? What does that look like these days? Daryl, do you have a thought?
No, I think orange results in what I call, when I do talks on this, is the whole technocratic business of material gain and all these things. At the end of the day, the only way green emerges because of the end result of the orange, I mean, my thrive kind of a thing results in loneliness. I mean, that's the only way to put it. You find yourself, you won, I won. What did I win? And is this all there is to life? And therefore, that's the way I look at it. So as orange starts to wane, it drives that person to being lonely. I mean, that's my way of thinking of it. Or
Bob, you really
Josh
bring
has
up.
had his hand up for a long time. Josh, oh, maybe he just left it up.
No, I hadn't lowered it from before. Sorry.
Barbie, you really hit on an interesting idea, and that is, and this is one of the difficulties of getting into discussions around spiral dynamics, because it's that balancing of the individual, the upper two quadrants balancing with the lower two quadrants. And so, is it possible for an individual who is, deeply ensconced in orange to start to have those feelings of meaninglessness and loneliness and unsatisfaction, to then think in terms of transitioning to something that we call green? I mean, I think that's absolutely possible, and it probably happens all the time. The problem is, because orange deals with the objective world, it's not just the individual. It's the fact that you have corporations, giant institutions who are, and I'll just use this as one example, who are trained in, their leadership is trained to focus on the bottom line to the exclusion of everything else. So that philosophy resides in that corporation. It's reinforced in the universities and the B schools around the country. And it's reinforced again in a stock market that basically buys into the same thing. And what it does is, not only if you don't follow that, it'll punish you. It'll destroy you. And
It sure will.
how do you
And
get it?
add short-term bottom line to that.
Right. And it's an individual can change on a dime. Institutions and layer upon layer of institutions, that's a whole nother ball game. And I think that's probably what the integral V-memes are struggling with right now. How do you actually change that?
I mean, that's a really key thought. I think my hit is that as long as the structures are in place that support the status quo, then the status quo has been dominated pretty much by orange. Now, whether or not the diminishing of blue meant orange got worse and unproductive, it still drove it, whether it was positive or negative. At the end of the day, orange, as it becomes mature, will result in that low materialistic kind of way of thinking and being. I think one of the healthy expressions of the green meme, let's say in the corporate institutional space, is the emergence of what's called the B corporation. A half step towards that way was the employee stock ownership companies, which I kind of thought is just a play that companies do to show their goodness. But the fact that B corporations is emerging now is very much a greening of the corporate space in a healthy way.
Well, and then even before the ESOPs, the whole concept of the cooperative.
Mhm.
You know, one of the largest corporations in Europe, oh gosh, I can't remember the name of it, but it's headquartered out of Spain.
Yeah, I know.
Starts with an M.
Yeah.
Mondragon or something like that.
Bacagon, yes, very good example. Very healthy.
I mean, it's a big company and it's a cooperative.
Mhm.
Well, and it scales green, right?
Yes,
So,
yes, it does.
so you thought, Daryl, that I was saying green can't scale. No,
Mhm.
I'm saying green is not scaling. That doesn't mean it couldn't, right?
Right.
So there's a big difference. Yes.
Right.
So that's certainly an example of green scaling.
Mhm.
On the other hand, then you get somebody like REI or Patagonia, right, who are fake green, you know, and is all they do is cater to the affluent.
Well, I don't know. I mean, are they fake green?
I just don't see them as being something that's scalable, because their whole pricing structure, their whole way of being in business works only for very affluent people.
But that is their market, and that's their choice. But I would.
I know, but it can't scale to help the world.
Fair enough. But so I think there is promise there, and I don't disagree with the scaling issue. I don't disagree, but I would say I would push back on the fact that they're fake green, mainly for this reason. They are one of the first B corporations, certified B corporations, which means they exist not solely for the purpose of their bottom line or their stock owners, but they are there to balance the needs of their employees. And I saw this firsthand with my stepdaughter who worked there. They're here, they intentionally try to balance the needs of their employees with the needs of the society, with the needs of their customers, and with the needs of their stock owners. So yeah, maybe they don't scale. I can't disagree with that. But for the existence that they manifest, they actually, for all the constituent parts that make themselves who they are, be it they are catering to an affluent clientele, oh well, you can't, everybody can't be everything to everyone. So for their market, but I just think there's something to this B corporation movement, I guess.
So think about Costco as the alternative to that, right? So we've got Patagonia, right? We've got Costco, and then we've got Walmart, say, as different endpoints. So Costco, both from less affluent customers and from employees who seem to think it's a good place to work, you know, has Costco maybe gone more toward what I would see is less affluent, spoiled brat version of green, or are they just really clever orange? I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, I think all of these are really good examples. I had forgotten about Costco, but I mean these are, and I'll just put them all under the umbrella of the benefit corporation that Daryl mentioned.
Costco is not, I don't believe.
No, I don't. Yeah, but just the concept of
Right. Co-ops, benefit organizations, yeah, right.
Co-ops, benefit organizations or benefit corporations, and you know, to me, these are corporations who are genuinely doing what they can to act within the green V meme, but they're operating within the orange V meme. And they, to a certain extent, well, not to a certain extent, they do strive to follow the rules of the Orange V meme. So they're not just espousing green. They're not just saying green sounding things. They're actually doing it, but they're doing it within
Their
the
markets.
balance of trying to maintain a balance between orange and green. You know, I guarantee you that Costco and Mondragon, I mean, they're probably not very often bogged down by endless discussions that take place among their employees to try to come to a decision about what product to put on the shelves. I mean, they probably make those decisions based on very orange values, but they also do honor and try to act like in a more green way.
But our local Costco has put things on the shelf because customers have suggested it to the employees.
Right. Yeah. And that's to me, and again, that's kind of it's tipping your hat in the direction of green. You're considering not only what the CEO says or what the executive management team or the board says, you're considering what the input your employees give, the input that your customers give, which that's communal, I think. Susan, go ahead.
I would just say I have a career's worth of experience on Wall Street. And one of the reasons I left was because every company, regardless of what their public face is, their organization, their attention to multiple stakeholders, they really are driven, even if they're incorporating these things, someone representing that structure is going to make sure that it translates to the maximum bottom line, because it's the only slave owner there is of the corporation. And so my question about that is a little bit like a person who's at a lower level of development, but virtue signals that they're at a higher one because they think they should be there. And, you know, I see a lot of posturing in the spiritual environments that I'm in, and also these personal development ones. People like to say I'm second tier. People like to say I'm at stage 12, whatever that is. And I think corporations are doing some of that. I mean, look at Mobil and Exxon in the 80s. You know, we're beginning to do those ads in the Wall Street Journal about all the good they're doing and putting money into things. It would be like $1 million they were putting into something, a drop in the bucket and if they can justify that $1 million because it's going to translate to a better image, which means people will not buy their gasoline or other products, I think it goes through that filter, all of it. And if it doesn't, it can't fail it spectacularly if they're a publicly traded company. It has to translate because they're living on the capital and the price of their stock.
Well, and
I'm not being cynical either. I think it's just it's reality.
It's reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's the system. I think you said this earlier, Daryl, where we're in a very broken system, which is now a huge flywheel, which so much momentum that there's literally nothing that can stop it. Even when participants within it would like to at least slow it down. And I'll have to say, I think less and less as I've stopped in the last couple of years, but the last few years when I worked in corporations compared to the Exxon Mobil days, I will say that the number of executives that I find that are interested in slowing it down is less than I found 20 years ago, believe it or not. They've taken the Tony Robbins talk a good talk. I have a friend who did NLP and she used to talk about coaching and training these executives to sound as if they're not the sociopaths that they are. But I think it's gotten worse, not better, because we're in an end stage. But the ability for this flywheel to keep going on is, I think, Paul, you said this earlier, it's incredible to think about a way to make it stop other than total collapse.
There's so many layers and it's so complex and interconnected. I don't know how to, I mean, having said that, I acknowledge there are other streams of organizations, of institutions that are taking different approaches. I mean, just the whole nonprofit world is another example. I mean, nonprofits must balance mission and margin. They have to if they're going to survive.
But they too have become very corrupt by their donors, right? I mean, Josh sees it as environmental. I know I've talked to Saeed about seeing it in the Middle East.
Well, yeah, and I have to admit, the nonprofit world is very, very, very big. It's changed very rapidly, and I'm not looking at the nonprofit world in its totality. I'm taking more of a nostalgic look from the perspective of experience I've had. I mean, yeah, you're right. There are a lot of nonprofits that basically are totally tied to their funders, and they do what their funders want and demand, but it's possible for.
So our next session should be on postmodernism and neoliberalism or something like that. My stepdaughter.
So are we ready to stop the recording? I think we are. We're at time.
I think
Paul.
that's a good idea. I'm gonna quick do that, and then we can continue on.
I have to go. I have a seminar. I'm expressing my redness. I got a kung fu seminar I got to go teach. But I really enjoy.
Keep that red.
Yeah, folks,
I like my red.
I want to thank everybody for their input. This has been a good discussion, and we're going to sign off right now. And so I hope those who choose to view this later will enjoy it. Thank you.
great. And sometimes for folks who don't know,